people don't like to think. And so it's hard to read difficult books like Beyond Good and Evil because you're just forced to think, and it's just exhausting. You wish that he would just go away, which is why they're trying to not teach difficult books in universities anymore, so that people don't have to undergo the difficult process of actually having to think and transform themselves. Anyways, I read Jeffrey Gray's book, The Neuropsychology of Anxiety, and it was like that. He was something, man. Student of a psychologist named Hans Eysenck, who was the most cited psychologist in the 20th century, and really quite a good psychologist. He laid a lot of the groundwork for modern theories of temperament and personality. They've been modified since his work, but he got extroversion right. He was the first person to really identify extroversion in a manner that could be measured. Carl Jung actually invented the notion, but Eysenck figured out how to measure it, which is a big deal. And he also noted that there was another important personality dimension, neuroticism, which is the tendency towards negative emotion. And he got that right too, because that actually happened to be the case, and he figured out how to measure it. And so Eysenck was the first person who really established conceptually the fact that we have two fundamental emotional systems, one positive and one negative, that they're not opposites exactly. They're actually separate biological systems. So some people can be extroverted, which means they're quite happy and assertive. They smile a lot, they laugh a lot, they tell a lot of jokes, they like to party. They always like to be around people. That's an extroverted person. And they can also be unhappy, worried, anxious, depressed, frustrated, disappointed. I mean, living with someone like that's quite a trip because they're just all over the place. But, but there are people like that because you can be high in negative emotion and you can be high in positive emotion, or low in both, or whatever. And it's useful to know that. It's useful to know that about your partner and about the people around you. And if you are interested in this sort of thing, by the way, I have a personality test online at understandmyself.com, and you can go there, and it takes you about 15 minutes, and it gives you 5 dimensions of personality: extroversion, neuroticism, that's positive and negative emotion; agreeableness, which is it's probably the maternal instinct dimension, but at least it's the variance between compassion and competitive aggression. It's something like that, and that looks like a continuum. And there's another dimension, which is trait conscientiousness, which is integrity and dutifulness, orderliness, industriousness. And then finally, the 5th dimension, which is openness, which is like a hybrid between intelligence, roughly, and creativity. And so you can go there and find out how you compare to other people. And that's kind of interesting and useful, because it's kind of useful to know who you are. And to know that that's actually who you are, that you have a nature. And some of that stuff's movable, but it's not as movable as you think. And the farther you want to move it, the harder it is to move. Like, you can take an introvert. You're an introvert if when you're around people, you get exhausted by it and you have to go off by yourself and recover. Then you're an introvert. And if you're an introvert, you don't really like being in groups. And so sales, maybe that's not for you, And that's a good thing to know, because if you're an introvert, why go be a salesperson and be miserable? Do something where you can spend time alone and not be miserable. That's better. You might as well match your occupation to your temperament rather than the other way around. Now, you can take an introvert. I've worked with lots of introverts who say had made pretty good progress in their careers, and they were at a point where they had to do a lot of social networking, and otherwise they were going to hit a plateau in their career. And they could be taught the skills of extroversion sort of one at a time, rather painfully. So they could learn them, they could accrue the skills, and that would broaden their personality outward into the, say, extroverted end of the continuum. But it didn't make them extroverts. And so they were still temperamentally introverts. And so, if you're a neurotic person, high in negative emotion, you can learn to regulate your anxiety and so forth. But you hit a point of diminishing returns, and it's difficult. It's effortful. So, anyways, back to Eysenck and then back to Jeffrey Gray. So Eysenck identified extroversion and introversion, or extroversion and neuroticism, and that's going to be very important in a minute. And Gray elaborated Eysenck's theories to a large degree, but he did that neurologically. He was a master of the animal experimental literature. And a lot of that's being phased out of universities because the regulations for animal experimentation have become so onerous and difficult that it's much easier for beginning scientists just not to bother. And that's a real catastrophe because we have learned a lot about the brain in the last 50 years, a lot. And we've learned very little about the brain from PET scans and MRI scans and like that complicated technology that's used to study human beings, and an unbelievable amount by studying animals. And you might think, rats in particular, and you might think, well, you know, rats, why? They're not much like human beings, you know, but that's wrong. You share, I don't know what it is, 98.5% of your genetic structure with rats. Some of you probably more than that.